Hello and welcome back to A Splash of Paint, where it's time for us to join today's special guest, Geoff Kersey, as he shares his secret for getting the ultimate flat surface to create picture-perfect watercolour paintings.
Today I want to show you how to stretch paper. Now I personally prefer the heavier weight papers, 300 pound or 640 gram, because as a professional artist I'm quite busy. It's one painting after another or one demonstration after another, and for time alone I need to use the heavier paper. But I do realise that it's quite expensive. It's more than double the price, and that a lot of people do like to use the 140 pound or 300 gram weight. And there's nothing wrong with it. It has a lovely surface, great to paint on. The only problem is, inevitably with watercolour, we use a lot of water, we get the surface wet, and it cockles and bends like that. Now that can make the painting process more difficult, but even if you get through the painting process okay, your cockled paper is very difficult then to mount and frame successfully. So let's try and avoid that by stretching paper. A lot of people have asked me as I travel around doing workshops, painting holidays, etc. They've asked me about stretching paper because they do have one or two problems with it. And there are a few tips and hints that can dramatically increase your success rate. So this piece of paper, I've already immersed it in water. And it's important to totally immerse it, but not for too long. This was underwater for maybe half a minute to a minute at the most. Any longer than that, and you do lose quite a lot of the size off the paper, and you also maybe expand it that little bit too much, because of course the principle of stretching paper is that when it's wet it expands, and you then secure it in its expanded state. It tries to contract and it can't, so it tightens up almost like a drum skin. So that's been left on this board now for a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, and it's cockled as it's expanded. So I'm just going to make sure I get it nice and flat. And then I'm going to take a piece of kitchen roll and just take this around the edge of the paper, just so the edge is a bit drier than the middle. That's quite important because that means that the tape will stick before it starts to contract. Okay, now I've cut some pieces of tape. It's very important because that you use gum strip tape, masking tape, or any sort of tape that won't stick to a wet surface doesn't work. It's got to be a tape that you wet to make sticky. Gum strip is ideal, and I suggest you use the 50mm or 2-inch wide gum strip so you've got plenty to stick to. And it needs to be very wet. So I've got a natural sponge full of clean water, and I'm just going to run that under the sponge so that tape is very wet. And then I'm laying it on the paper about half and half. Half the tape is on the paper, half of it is on the board. I'm really burnishing it down. Same again. Getting it really wet. And again, half on the paper, half on the board. If you don't have enough tape sticking to the paper, then it might pull away from under the tape as it dries. Again, really burnished down. And very wet. If the tape isn't wet enough, it doesn't stick. I'm really making sure that is stuck down. And one final thing that I do then is just maybe take a bit of the moisture off the middle so it's not too wet. So you need to leave that maybe 2 or 3 hours to dry. You can't put it on an easel or lean it against a wall to dry because the water will run down and under the bottom piece of tape, and then that piece of tape won't stick. So leave it flat. Probably takes about 2 or 3 hours to dry, and then you should have a lovely flat taut surface that's crying out to be painted on.
Great tip there, Geoff. It's really important to get the surface as taut as possible to stop the surface becoming uneven as you paint. And it also helps when you come to mount and frame your picture. Well, time for our final break now, folks, but join us in part 4 where Marilyn Allis brings her own drop of Caribbean sunshine in the concluding part of today's Try Your Hand At project. And I'll be answering a few more of the questions from the Splash of Paint postbag. Join us very soon.